Now, at the time this story takes place, I was broke with all the stresses that go along with a relationship and stuff when you're broke. I was broke, struggling to finish this book, broke and blocked, and waging a war I was losing with these rats that had invaded our house. Now, these are Norway rats, ship stowaways hundreds of years ago, and they are big and brown, resistant to traps and to poisons. I know I tried both. They sprung all my traps and licked the bait clean. As for the poison, they gobbled that up every morsel and crumb, but all that did was change their turds a brilliant green. Sort of the color of summer grass, and there was some irony in this. Because the first sign of the rats came when I noticed I sprout wheatgrass in my backyard. I'm a hippie like that. And I noticed that my backyard trays of wheatgrass had been disturbed. Now at first I blamed the squirrels. Because in that house we had all kinds of squirrels. And the squirrels have been looking confused ever since the landlord cut down all the trees. But my landlord, who had some funny theories, he wanted to sell the house somewhere in the distant future, and he had this idea that the only people who would be able to afford the house were the Chinese. And according to my landlord, who grew up in India, Chinese people hate trees. So he cut them all down. Anyway, we moved the wheatgrass trays into the basement, and a few days later I discovered this dead rat in my backyard compost bin. It was a big sucker. I mean, you know, not the size of a Labrador Retriever or anything, but it was right up there with your average house cat. And I didn't really have the heart or the stomach to move the dead rat. I grew up in the country, and if something dies in the country, you just kind of throw it over the back fence or bury it. I don't know what to do with the carcass of an animal in the city, so I decided the rat could stay, and I retired the compost bin instead. Now, summer turned to fall, and for a little while I forgot about the rats. I busied myself. I was putting plastic up on the windows and the inside, you know, and heating it with the hair dryer to keep the draft out. I bought myself these new thick wool socks because I find the older I get, I can't stand the cold. And neither could the rats apparently, because it was about this time that they moved their base of operations into the house. Now, here's a few brief highlights of how rats announce their presence. One night, standing in the kitchen, looking for a midnight snack, I wrap my hand around something wet and squishy on the kitchen counter. And I turn on the light and I discover I'm holding a banana with the middle gnawed out of it. Kind of looks like the banana is smiling at me. All around the corpse of the late banana is a bunch of these conspicuously large green turds. A few days later, my basement tenant comes upstairs. He says, "Hey Steve, when did you get the new cat?" What are you talking about, Bolton? We didn't get a cat. Well, what ran across my chest in the middle of the night? He wants to know. But the worst part were the things that the rats would do that would get you playing head games with yourself. Like, I'm a night owl, and I would be sitting up, you know, in my reading chair in the middle of the night, and you just see this thing go across the doorway, and you'd look over. You couldn't go back to your book. You'd be sitting there for the next half hour darting glances and you couldn't figure out whether you'd actually seen the thing or whether your mind was just playing tricks with you now. But it had gotten so bad that I couldn't work anymore, because my office in that house was located down in the basement, and that's where the rats had set up their headquarters. And day and night it seemed like you couldn't get anything done because you could hear them scuttling to and fro behind the walls. And it got so bad that I took to leaving the lights off all the time, because I didn't really want to see a rat unless it was dead, and I didn't even really want to see a dead one. So instead, I took to creeping around in my own house in the middle of the day wearing a Petzl headlamp, sort of like a thief in the night. Now that worked out well for a while, until one day I'm throwing a load of clothes in the washing machine, and I turn to grab the detergent just off the shelf right beside me, and here's a rat, I mean not this far away, sitting looking right at me. And I guess this thing doesn't like the headlamp shining right in its eyes, because it rears up on its little haunches and bares its teeth and kind of hisses at me. Well, it's clear to me at this point this rat is about to leap and rip my throat out. So I turn and run straight into the wall. knocking the wind completely out of myself, which at least puts an end to my girlish screams. But at this point, the line in the sand has been drawn. I've had enough, and I load the basement down. More traps, more poison, glue boards. None of it makes a difference.